We are barely through preseason game number 1, and the 49ers are already banged up. Vish just dropped an absolute knowledge bomb on me that I never even thought of, and yet there may be something to it. We explain next. What is good, everybody? Welcome to Under Review on the Gold Standard and the Fans First Sports Network. I am Rob Stats Guerrera. That is Vish Kumar. And Vish, how are you on this fine Monday evening?
I'm good, Rob. I'm good. I've got a lot of life going on. I'm a little behind when it comes to the 49ers. I'm yet to watch the preseason game. So you and I won't be talking as much about that, though I'm sure we'll cover some of my opinions from that when I eventually get to watch it. But there's something else that you and I just talked about. You were just giving me the quick rundown of things I've missed in Ninerville the last few days, and I feel like we landed on a topic that nobody's covered yet.
Unbelievably, never even, as soon as you said it, I was like, my God, how did I not think of that? First, we'll talk about what Kyle Shanahan said today because it ties in. So we'll absolutely get to that. Basically, 49ers are hurting. They are absolutely banged up. Kyle Shanahan said after the game this weekend that 23 players miss practice before the game. We, of course, knew Ambry Thomas broke his forearm. That's probably the end of Ambry Thomas in San Francisco. Kalia Davis, we found out today, hurt his knee. He's going to miss half the season after having knee surgery, which is frustrating because he flashed a couple of times, and we've sort of been, waiting for Kalia Davis to kind of show us something. We thought maybe we were getting it, and now we're going to have to wait half a year, although Kyle Shanahan said they do expect him to get on the field and contribute this year. But again, today, the list of guys not at practice is longer than it feels like the guys that actually participated. How are the 49ers having so many injuries this early in the season?
Yeah, so one thing I'll mention real quick on Kalia Davis, I haven't watched the game, and I know he flashed, like it's been everywhere. Kalia Davis flashed, but just when he was coming out in the draft, this is supposed to be like the DJ Jones replacement. They never got that guy, that undersized guy who can take on double teams, but is also explosive enough to rush the passer. Kalia Davis almost prototypes into that, and his entire career has unfortunately been this. From when he came out of UCF, he was injured, and it's just been a case of his knee hasn't been right. And when you look at a guy built the way he is, he's so short and stocky, but he's so explosive. For being that short and stocky, you've got to wonder if he's got lower body injuries, where that if that explosiveness will remain, because it seems like he came back and was explosive early in this preseason game, and I'll have more opinions of that when I watch it. Now, speaking of the injuries specifically, one thing that hasn't been talked about is the 49ers lost Ben Peterson this year, right? That was the guy they hired from hockey in order to fix their injury problem in 2019. And right after they hired him, right, they had the 2020 injury, just absolute disaster. Now, I feel like the 2020 circumstances can be attributed maybe towards COVID rather than Ben Peterson, but it felt like the 49ers seemingly turned the corner at the end of 2023 and in 2024 when it came to injuries. It felt like finally the injury bad luck had run out on them. It felt like they were finally trending towards being a team healthy. They lost him this offseason. Maybe they lost somebody, and I know they're probably implementing similar practices to what they were implementing with him, but he might have been the leader, the visionary behind what was the best way to keep these players healthy. And unfortunately, it seems like the 49ers are once again getting injured at a historic pace. We're not like talking about a few guys getting hurt here and there, Rob. We're talking about a 2020 situation almost all over again. These guys have barely enough guys to practice.
It is very upsetting. I had not thought of that at all. The fact that their head trainer is not their head trainer anymore. And look, I'm sure he wasn't a wizard, but it is kind of suspect that as soon as he goes, all these guys get hurt. Now, of course, the big difference between what we saw in 2020 and what we're seeing now is right now, none of these injuries other than Ambry Thomas and Kalia Davis are long-term major injuries, right? Christian McCaffrey said if it was a real game, he would have played. Ricky Pearsall is going to be back at some point. We're not talking about Nick Bosa blowing up his knee and Solomon Thomas blowing up his knee and Jimmy Garoppolo getting hurt and George Kittle like missing huge chunks of the year. These hopefully are not long-term injuries.
I feel like to an extent. So two things that I want to say on that. First, I finally just realized what jersey you're wearing. I was asleep this entire time. I was like, oh, this guy showed up in a Ricky Pearsall jersey. Oh, wait. He's wearing a jersey of his favorite quarterback, preseason quarterback, superstar, Sammy Darnold.
I
Now,
don't know
coming
what
back
you're
to,
talking about. This is a Ricky Pearsall jersey, and you can't prove otherwise.
have you put this tape over it yet? Taped Pearsall over the Darnold?
No, I did a Bleacher Report stream with Michelle, and since she's the reason I own the jersey because I lost the bet to her, I wore it for her for the show, and then I just never took it off. But no one's ever going to see the back
That
of the.
much? You love the way you look in it that much?
No one will ever see the back of it. This is a Ricky Pearsall jersey from now on.
All right, but coming back to your point about the injuries, I'm actually a little more concerned in this particular case. I hate the label of these short-term injuries because we've seen these tend to linger. And I feel like when you've got players coming into the season somewhat injured, George Kittle is the best example of this, right? How long does it take George Kittle to get healthy in the season and feel comfortable playing with that injury, right? George Kittle's seasons are always almost the same since 2020. He comes into the season hurt. He then gets barely healthy enough to play week one. He maybe gets banged up early in the year. He then slowly, gradually gets healthier. From weeks like 7 to 15, 14, he's like peaking. Kittle's playing great. Everybody's like, Kittle's the best tight end in football. He then gets hurt somewhere in the end of the year, and he goes into the offseason totally banged up. And it's been a trend. So I'm a little bit concerned when we're talking even calf strain for Christian McCaffrey, right? Like that's an injury that can tend to linger. So I'm not a big fan when they just say, oh, these are short-term injuries. Obviously, a short-term injury is quote unquote better than a long-term injury because there's a timetable to return. I'm extremely nervous though when it comes to the 49ers. And then the Kalia Davis one, Rob, we'll see how many setbacks happens with that one. I hate to be the pessimist when it comes to stuff like that, but I feel like I have put a lot of eggs into different 49ers returning midseason and being key contributors. And I don't know that that's always the most realistic possibility given the track record they've had returning from serious injuries.
It's fair. It's completely understandable. We know that not only injuries, but setbacks have been an issue for the 49ers. Now, we will say this. Last year, for the first time ever in the Shanahan era, the Niners were relatively healthy. They were the fourth healthiest team last year, which is the first time they had ever not been in the top 10 of most injured teams under Kyle Shanahan. Maybe that was a one-year fluke. I don't know. It's certainly not off to a good start this year. That's for sure. I mean, they're signing Keyshawn Vaughn to play running back. Matt Breida's come. The ghost of Matt Breida is back playing running back. Like, yeah, it is. They've had cluster injuries too. It has not been a great start.
And I love that you went to the last year versus this year because that's really our only data point with Ben Peterson, right? When we bring him up. Besides that, the 49ers were really injured until Ben Peterson too. But it seemed like they turned that corner. That's the one thing. It seems like they turned that corner. Now he's gone and it feels like, damn, maybe was it a one-year fluke that they were healthy? Were they always just a team bound to get injured and they somehow flukishly stayed healthy last year? Well, you know, Rob, as a fan and as a disappointed fan who's still got some lingering emotions tied to last year's Super Bowl, it makes me that much angrier that they didn't win it last year because it feels like a lot based on what's happened injury-wise this year that last year was meant to be for the 49ers. It was that year.
They were healthy in the regular season last year, but not in the playoffs. Debo got hurt in 2 of the 3 playoff games. Dre Greenlaw blows up his Achilles in the Super Bowl. Like, Kittle got hurt in the Super Bowl.
But they played a Chiefs team that had, Charles Omenihu get injured in the Super Bowl. They had guys get injured coming into the Super Bowl on their defensive line. There was some fortunate injury luck in the 49ers sense that usually when they play those games at the end of the year, they're the more injured team. Even though they did get more injured, I did feel like in almost all the games Greenlaw maybe. I was trying to think of like a truly key player that they missed because I feel like at other points at the end of the year, we could point to a key player that, hey, was just out for them.
Greenlaw, Debo, Kittle. I mean, they were all hurt. Kittle, I mean, did you watch receiver? I mean, he could not go in the Super Bowl. He told Kyle Shanahan, don't throw me a pass.
Right. I mean, I feel like that's the case in point, though, with George Kittle.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I was about to make another point, and then you interrupted me, and now I don't remember what I was going to say.
Oh, my bad.
How dare you? You've totally derailed
It's the
me.
Darnold jersey, man. You tend to forget important details when you're wearing that thing. You know
I'm
Sammy D is best quality. He forgets his mistakes. He bounces back quickly. He's got that Jimmy G bounce back.
Rich Madrid is tweeting out like throws from Sam. Look at this layered throw from Sam Darnold. I'm like, my God, what are we doing here? I mean, God. Anyway, don't get me started on that rant.
That's the thing with Darnold, though. Like, if you put a compilation of his high-level plays in the NFL, Dan Orlovsky will have everybody convinced that that's the greatest quarterback we've ever seen.
Oh, I see what you did there, Vish. I see you wanted to grab the wheel and steer us over to the Dan Orlovsky conversation. So we can do it. If you didn't see it, Dan Orlovsky decided to do some quarterback rankings. I don't know why he decided to do them now as the preseason is underway, but he did his a little differently. He had 7 different categories: arm strength, ball placement, mechanics, decision-making, pocket presence, rushing ability, and second reaction. And he ranked all the quarterbacks according to those abilities. And I'll say this, Vish, Brock Purdy appears in the top 10 lists in a lot of these different categories.
100%. I feel like he didn't add. Like, it felt like the NFL had 14 quarterbacks that Dan Orlovsky ranked in 10 different categories if you really look at the list, right? Like, a lot of different quarterbacks didn't make a majority of the list. Like, he's got Joe Burrow as a better runner than Kyler Murray. That's the thing on Dan Orlovsky's list, okay? Here's the thing with Dan Orlovsky that I've noticed, okay? I'm going to let other people make these observations for themselves. But you know the coaches that Dan Orlovsky played with and played for? Do you know the quarterbacks that Dan Orlovsky played with? You know the quarterbacks that are represented by CAA, the agency that Dan Orlovsky is represented by? They tend to get a lot of hype from Dan Orlovsky. That seems to be a consistent case with Dan Orlovsky. And so you can take that for what you will, but I just tend to notice that. And I would say one of the things I didn't enjoy about the list is I feel like when you're talking about categories like that, there's a lot of quarterbacks who maybe wouldn't rank up so high in terms of their overall capabilities, but they have one particular quality or trait that ranks them within the top 10 in the NFL. And I don't think Dan Orlovsky really represented the full sample size, to be honest. I think he took 14 quarterbacks and that was about it. He didn't rank the majority of other guys. And yeah, Joe Burrow being a better runner than Kyler Murray is ridiculous.
I did not notice that when I sent it to you. He has Joe Burrow 8th in rushing ability, Kyler Murray 9th. He says he included Burrow in part, for his scrambling ability, but like, dude, I don't care if it's scrambling, if it's flat out design runs, whatever it is. Kyler Murray is light years ahead of Joe Burrow in that one category. And I'm a Kyler hater. He's better than Joe Burrow. Like, come on, we watch the games. They're on TV.
Yeah. I also think the scrambling thing when it comes to Joe Burrow is very good at moving and finding space to throw in the pocket, but he gets ran down and sacked a lot when he tries to escape out of the pocket. He runs himself into a lot of sacks when he's trying to escape the pocket. And I think there's, again, a subtle difference to a lot of these categories. If you want, we can go through them, like the ball placement thing. The ball placement thing is like a convenient balance between, like, for example, it makes no sense, right? Or go to the decision making if you can.
Decision making with the football.
Yeah. So, for example, this one doesn't make any sense to me, okay? Because Matthew Stafford being second in this category, to me, Rob, is an indication that he's not looking for the people that make the highest percentage of good decisions. It's the people who are the highest in terms of their calculatedness in their decision making, if that makes sense. Because Stafford takes a lot of calculated risks that pay off with a lot of dividends, but also pay off with mistakes. Now, they're technically good decisions because they're or not bad decisions because he takes high percentage risks, but they're risks nonetheless, right? That's why he throws interceptions. That's why he can have, incompletions down the field. So if you're talking about decision-making like that, right? If you're talking about decision-making like that with Stafford, then you go down the list. A lot of these guys aren't, like Aaron Rodgers being one. Aaron Rodgers is the most conservative decision maker in all of football. How does that make sense? Like, the first two guys are completely polar opposites in how they represent this category. I don't understand that right off the bat immediately. Like, Aaron Rodgers probably makes the most, like, good decisions in terms of not creating negative plays, if that makes sense. Especially, I mean, even the sacks, it's a little questionable to have Rodgers there. But that's how I would put it. And then so he's really talking about processing here, right? That's what he's trying to say. He's trying to say who identifies the best place to go with the ball in terms of the defense. And even that, it's all kinds of confusing to me how he has this list, because I wouldn't have Kirk Cousins 10th. I wouldn't have Dak Prescott 8th. And I certainly wouldn't have Jordan Love ahead of Patrick Mahomes. Okay.
The Jordan Love praise is out of control. Brock Purdy's 5th on the list for anybody that's not watching the stream. He has Rodgers 1, Stafford 2, Burrow 3, CJ Stroud 4, Brock Purdy 5. Brock Purdy's in a lot of these lists. Let's see if I can go back.
He played for Shanahan.
Yeah, let's see. Arm strength, he's not in the top 10. That's understandable.
I actually didn't mind his arm strength one, by the way. I don't know about that exact rankings, but I thought the 10 were fair. I don't know about you on that one.
I was mainly looking at Brock, like how many was Brock on and where did he have him ranked? I didn't really care about the list. Brock is 5th.
He sneaks Jared Goff into a lot of these. Not that Goff didn't have a really good season, but he played with Goff, by the way. I'm just throwing it out there.
Brock Purdy was 6th on the top 10 in ball placement from Dan Orlovsky. He was 9th in mechanics. I don't think of Brock as having particularly good mechanics. I will say I've watched a lot of the JT O'Sullivan breakdowns, and he does point out that Brock has his feet lined up in the proper position very quickly a lot of the time. So that is something I have noticed about his mechanics. But like his throwing motion or anything, I've not heard anything about it one way or the other.
Yeah, so I this one obviously very hard for you and I to comment on, right? We'll take Dan Orlovsky's opinion for it, but I think you did bring up a great nuance in mechanics, and I think JT O'Sullivan often draws that distinction, right? Because he always refers to the fact that he's not like a quarterback mechanics guy, so he's less talking about hey, his motion and his upper body, whether he throws the ball in the most efficient way of throwing the ball. And he's more so talking about how your body and your ability to throw aligns with the timing and footwork and the rhythm of the offense. And in those ways, Brock Purdy is seemingly excellent because he's always in a position to throw. He's always got his base under him, and he's always ready to get the ball out on time and on schedule. But I like this one. Yeah, really hard to go through. And I feel like even that one, Rob, if we're going to go through it, I'm not going to question Dan Orlovsky's listing of those guys in terms of mechanics. I'll defer to his opinion. But I think he's teetering between those two things I just discussed above. Like he doesn't have a clarity in that category, whether it's about the mechanics in the offense, when a guy like Rodgers, for example, has had historically lazy feet that he gets away with because of his ability to throw, or if it's just the throwing ability where a guy like Brock is top 10, where he might not have, the quickest and the most efficient delivery, right? He has a little loop to it, but he's so efficient and so precise in terms of his mechanics within his offense. So I'm just hating on Dan Orlovsky's list, but it's totally indecisive to me. I
have realized I don't care about mechanics at all. Can you get the ball on target on time? That's all I care about. I don't care. If you're a golfer, like whether your swing is whoever, pick any swing you want. I don't care. As long as you hit the ball straight and far, I'm good. Phillip Rivers had awful mechanics. He was one of the most accurate passers when he played in the game.
Absolutely.
Patrick Mahomes' mechanics are not that good in terms of like a traditional throwing motion, but you know what? He puts the ball wherever the hell he wants to put it, whenever the hell he wants to put it. So who really cares about mechanics?
And by the way, I think it's a nuance that's overdone and oversaid. Now, Dan Orlovsky, I feel like, he played quarterback. Obviously, this is something that he would know and it would be important for him to talk about. But I'm glad you went there, Rob, because honestly, I feel like people throw that out as just a reason. Like, what does that even mean oftentimes, right? I just brought up two distinct things that you could mean when you're talking about mechanics. One could be the actual mechanics of throwing the football, and then one could be the mechanics of playing quarterback in the offense. And the reality is you need to be excellent at both. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how the aesthetics look. You just have to have a process of both that works and gets the ball to the right place accurately, consistently. And I think for sure when we're talking Brock Purdy, that I would say is one of his strengths, regardless of how the throwing looks or how his arm is or anything like that. The ball gets where it needs to be most of the time and on schedule. And you can't ask for more than that.
Exactly. Like, let's not get crazy here. We don't have to live up to some like idealized version of what a throw is supposed to look like. And I'm not grading anybody down because they don't look like that. Just get it where it needs to be when it needs to be there. Dan Orlovsky.
And oftentimes it's awesome that you bring that up too, right? Because mechanics become right when a guy makes it work, right? You brought up the Mahomes example. In a lot of ways, people are using versions of Mahomes mechanics. Why? Mahomes made that set of mechanics that people thought was originally wrong
Right.
work. And that's a great example. If you can find a way to make whatever in your body you need to be able to throw the ball as hard as you can, as accurately as you can with control, and if you can do that functionally within an NFL offense, the aesthetics of it doesn't matter because people will adjust their rule of what's correct mechanics if you make things work. They'll find reasons why you work.
Right. It's just like a batting stance, right? Like do whatever you want. Yeah, there's like we all know the typical batting stance, right? You put the bat behind your head and you waggle it a little, your knees are slightly bent. But go watch a major league game. They're all over the place. There's all different kinds of stances because it doesn't matter. And if you were teaching your kid how to throw, you wouldn't teach them to do it the way Mahomes does it, but it doesn't matter again because he makes it work. Anyway, that's my mechanics rant. Pocket presence, Brock Purdy is 6th. I think he should be a little higher on the list, frankly. Warren Sharp just put out a tweet. Brock Purdy, 14.6% of the quarterback pressures last year turned into sacks. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8th best in the NFL. I don't think Brock Purdy gets enough credit for dealing with a crap offensive line, which, by the way, we got to see a little in the Titans game. Aaron Banks was hideously bad on his one drive of the game, the first drive. Awful, hideously bad. Brock hides a lot of the bad from the 49ers offensive line, so I think he should be higher on the list.
So I will say I don't know that I agree he needs to be higher. I feel like he's properly placed, but I do feel like he's not all too different from someone in this list who I do think is a little bit better at this category, but the perception of the two of them in this category to me is wildly different, and I don't know why. So the reason Brock Purdy, quote unquote, gets docked in this category by some, and I think in some ways it is a fair criticism, is that the offense has such great answers to pressure, right? Like oftentimes they're in the right play call versus the right stuff where, yeah, you see pressure getting into his face, but there's also a guy wide open, 10 yards in front of him that's about to catch it and run 60 yards, right? Like that's there too. Well, you know who else gets that, but is perceived to be just this Greek god when it comes to navigating the pocket? Tom Brady Jr. How about Joe Burrow? Jake Browning was able to function in that offense with a similarly bad offensive line. Now, I think Joe Burrow is very good at moving in the pocket. I do think he has very good pocket presence, though I think he holds the ball and takes some sacks looking for bigger plays that other quarterbacks would get criticized for, that he maybe doesn't get as much criticism for. But if you look at him and Brock Purdy, for example, in terms of pocket presence, I don't understand why Burrow is 2 on this list and Purdy is 6. I think they're quite similar. I feel like their offenses have answers to pressure. They often get the ball out of their hands quickly. They both play, I would say, a similar style. Now, I think Burrow has better attributes than Purdy. I would say Burrow is maybe a little bit better still in this category. But that was probably the one thing that stuck out because I don't mind Purdy at 6, but Burrow shouldn't be at 2, which feels like he's maybe a category above at Purdy. Burrow should maybe be at 4 or 5. But yeah, I think Patrick Mahomes should for sure be number 1 on this list. And honestly, I'd probably have Josh Allen too, Rob. I don't know that I see anybody else get out of more like, oh my God, plays than Josh Allen every Sunday.
Josh Allen is so ridiculously, insanely good. And just because he hasn't been able to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, sometimes through no fault of his own, he gets hated on. It's unreal. I would kill to have Josh Allen.
I don't get the Josh Allen, Joe Burrow perception difference. I feel like Joe Burrow gets all the credit that Josh Allen should, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because Joe Burrow got to a Super Bowl. And Josh Allen has.
He did do that, to be fair. Yeah. I guess when Josh Allen hasn't done that, but
Joe Burrow beat Patrick Mahomes to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. But Josh Allen probably has played better against Patrick Mahomes in all those games than Joe Burrow did. Yeah, yep. No, that's a tough one. Doesn't matter,
though. Mahomes is so good. If you beat him, you get elevated to a status that is incredible because it's been Brady and Burrow, and that's it. If your last name doesn't start with B, you ain't beating Patrick Mahomes, apparently.
Yeah. I actually amend that. I kind of do understand why the media talks about it that way. I'll say I find it frankly wrong. Like, I do think it's Mahomes tier, Allen tier, then these rest of the guys fall in. And I think there's a lot of differences in 3 through 10, how you can rank them. And I think there's maybe 10 to 12 guys that fall into a category where, depending on what you're looking for, you can find them all somewhere in those lists.
How about this? Second reaction ability Dan Orlovsky has Brock Purdy fourth. It goes Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, and Brock. That is some serious respect from Dan Orlovsky. And I agree. I love Brock. When the play breaks down, I have confidence that he's going to make something happen.
Yeah, I agree. He's really efficient at doing it. He doesn't have a lot of attempts, but when he does it, he makes plays at a high percentage. Now, it looks different because he's not the one to run across, run outside the pocket and throw a 70-yard bomb back across the field or something like that. But if you look at, okay, he had to go second reaction on this play. What ended up happening? Usually it's 8-yard rush. It's dump off to McCaffrey. He got rid of the ball. He ends up making effective plays in those situations. So I agree. I know you're highlighting Gardner Minshew. For me, the more confusing thing is if Caleb Williams is on this list, then why isn't Caleb Williams in the arm strength list, for example? Like, I don't understand this. Like, if you're going to put Caleb Williams here just based as a rookie, then I feel like there's some rookies maybe that deserve placement in other parts of this list as well.
Also,
the Gardner Minshew thing is kind of ridiculous.
How can you put Caleb Williams on any list? We don't know anything about Caleb Williams. Like, do people forget the number one draft pick quarterbacks suck all the time? Like, and again, I'm not saying he's going to suck. I have no idea if Caleb Williams is good, but like, we're sitting here, throwing him on this list. We're praising him because he had a good preseason debut. I mean, God,
with
damn
7
it.
throws.
Like, what are we doing here? Let's just calm
with 7
down.
throws. I don't really get it. That's what I said. The entire list is confusing from a criteria standpoint. It looked like, how can Dan Orlovsky rank all the quarterbacks he likes and knows in the NFL in a way that will make them all a little bit happy when they call him up, he could be like, hey, you see, second reaction ability, Caleb. I said you were 6. I'm not a big Dan Orlovsky fan.
I'm picking up on that.
Yeah. I think he's a smart analyst, but I think that he often, sells out for those he knows. And yeah, I don't really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was the list. I saw it. I thought it was interesting. I wanted to see where Brock ranked on a bunch of the lists. And so that's that. I want to talk a little bit more about other things Kyle Shanahan said. I thought this was interesting. I think it was Larry Krueger who said, with the kickoffs, because we all know first kick return, the Niners gave up a 63-yarder to the Titans on Saturday. And Larry asked Kyle, like, hey, have you thought about just kicking it into the end zone and going touchback at the 30-yard line every time? And Kyle kind of joked like, oh, no, we haven't thought about that. But then he got serious and he said the average starting field position so far on kick returns is the 29. So he's like, why don't we just kick it into the end zone, give up no risk whatsoever, and move on with our lives? We sacrifice 1 yard of field position. And you know what? I'm 1,000% on board with it. Do it. You drafted Jake Moody because he has a giant leg, right? Use it.
Rob, you're setting yourself up, man.
What?
You being 100% okay for this is just waiting for week 1 when Dave Toub has schemed up something for the Kansas City Chiefs and it comes out and everybody's like, oh, that's what you could do with these special teams rules. Or in Dallas, John Bones Fossil, another creative special teams coordinator. He's got something in his bag for these special teams rules. And everybody's like, oh, that's what you can do. Or, the Patriots for years. I don't know what happens. Belichick is no longer there, but they usually had plans when rules and situations came like this. I don't care if week 1 in the preseason, the average kickoff is the 29. I don't think that that's the best statistical indicator for how this is going to result when the league comes on. I hope their plan isn't just to kick it through to the end zone because I feel like that's the easiest alternative. That's the easiest thing to pivot to. Like, yeah, we drafted a kicker in the 3rd round. Like, he's got a big enough leg. If nothing works, start kicking it through the end zone. But I hope you have a plan or something to try with these new rules first. I feel like the easiest solution is to kick it through the end zone. And I feel like these rules are going to have some advantages we will see other teams come up with. And I feel like the way they pooch kick or the way they directionally kick, if a quarterback maybe struggles throwing to a far hash and you're in a windy game, you now directionally kick them into the hash where he has to make far side throws into the wind, stuff like that. I think there's a lot of in-game advantages that can come from this. I just feel like we're not seeing them yet.
Oh, I'm sure there are different things. And I know there's going to be creative coaches around the league that come up with stuff. I'm saying we ain't got one of those. Kick it through the end zone. You give up no risk. That's a no risk solution. You give up 1 yard of field position on average, and let's go to work. Like, what?
No risk.
Why are we screwing around with all this other stuff when we've seen they couldn't cover the regular rules? Like what are we so afraid of? Kick it through the end zone and let's go.
Yeah, I disagree. I think it's high time they look for an advantage on special teams. Special teams, they try to play neutral and it always ends up hurting them. I don't necessarily, I'm done with this. Oh, we're going to just, like they drafted a kicker in the 3rd round. Safest thing that they could do in special teams. That kicker, he came through for them after not coming through. It felt like each time, right? I don't know how to add him up at the end of the day because he came through when he needed to, but he also didn't come through in order to be needed to come through oftentimes, and that was kind of the situation. They always tried to play it safe in terms of the return game. They got Ray McLeod. They had a special teams blunder, obviously, in the Super Bowl that affected them.
For people not watching on the stream, I brought up a picture of the transcript from today's Kyle Shanahan press conference. Vish, would you be so kind as to read the highlighted section of that transcript?
You always want to win the game on special teams, but the main thing is you don't want to lose it. And when you're experiencing new things like this, there's a lot of unknowns, and that's why we all have to be very involved in it. I don't know what he's saying by that. What is all of them being very involved in it? They're all going to huddle their heads together. I thought they only do things when they call plays, Rob. I thought that's the only time they do things during games.
He was asked, have you spent more time on the kickoff this year than years past? And he said yes. But he literally says in that answer, you want to win the game on special teams, but the main thing is you don't lose it. And that is clearly his special teams philosophy. Why do you think Trent Taylor's on the team, Vish? Because they just want a guy that doesn't fumble. They don't care that he has no juice.
Willie Snead had to go somewhere else. They needed to replace him. And Trent's one of the guys. He might have been in Nashville for McCaffrey's wedding.
They don't care that he's no threat to do anything on the return. He's going to win the job, Vish. And because they're going to be too scared to use Debo all the time. So it's going to be Debo when they need him, when they're trying to get a spark. Other than that, it's going to be Trent freaking Taylor because all Kyle wants is a guy to not fumble. And I continue to say.
Can I ask one thing then?
Yes.
Can I ask one thing? Okay, kick it through the end zone. Fine. Disappoint Vish. Vish wants to see a team be creative on special teams. Fine. Disappoint him. You're right. They win a lot of games without having to be aggressive on special teams, right? Okay, your philosophy works. But what about in situations that they do need to have something, right? Like the 49ers can never okay, man, they haven't done anything on offense. Let's produce a big play on special teams. Like when they do put Debo back there, when they do put Brandon Aiyuk or Christian McCaffrey, they haven't put Christian McCaffrey really, but when they do put these guys back there, it's almost like those guys aren't even prepared for those situations. It's like a very random spur of the moment. They don't have like a plan where, hey, if we need a big play on special teams, we're going to try to block them up this way. And we're going to try to get Debo to crack one like this. I feel like that doesn't even exist. And I feel like it would be nice for the 49ers to have something like that. Because I always feel like the Chiefs, for example, I'm saying they're using it, but I feel like watching Andy Reid and Dave Toub work together for years, they come to every game in their back pocket with a couple of special teams. Hey, if we need something, God needs to save us, we got a couple of special teams tricks in the back of our pocket to give us something. And I feel like when it comes to the 49ers, that's not even something they have. And when it seems like they need a big play from special teams, it's like, okay, let's just take a chance and put Debo out there and see what happens. It's not like they have a plan with putting Debo out there where they've worked on something. Is that a fair ask, Rob?
Well, first of all, I agree.
Kyle do that for me?
Andy Reid always has something up his sleeve, like for situational football. 3rd and short, 4th and short. Red zone inside the 5-yard line, 2-point conversions. He's like corn dog, the play that beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl. Like that's dialed up for that specific situation. You're a couple yards away from the end zone. You need to stick it in. That's like very, very game specific. He always has something like that. Baziman says, why wouldn't the Niners opponents just kick it through the end zone if they saw Debo out there as a return too? They should. I would. If I was an opponent, I absolutely would. But and I would be fine with that. Like now, if they could cover it, that was one thing, but they can't freaking cover it. So until you figure it out, kick it through the damn end zone.
I think you're going to see on some of these short kicks, some reverses. It's like where they, switch direction, handoffs, all kinds of stuff. Someone is pointing out Debo's returns in 2021 versus Green Bay. I'm pretty sure 2021 Green Bay is like the worst kickoff coverage in
Debo's pretty good on his kick returns in his career, though. He's usually been able to.
He was good, and he had a couple in 2021, and that big one was in the game versus Green Bay in Green Bay, the cold game, right? He had a big return, maybe coming out of the half, something like that. But he was not very good when they put him back last year on kick returns.
So
it would always be a big hype to not even get to the 20-yard line.
he has 9 kickoff returns in his career. He averages 25.5 yards per return. Last year, he averaged 25.7 in 6 returns. The year before, he averaged 25 yards in 3 returns.
Wow. What a total hater I am. I just made up an absolute statistic for the guy. Sorry.
Oh, I always love when I can bring you back down to reality. But I think that is their plan. I think Debo, like whenever they want something, it's going to be Debo and Juice back there. And Juice is going to be like the lead blocker, and they're going to hope it's like a big run play. And I would love if they did it. I don't ever want to see Trent Taylor back there for a kick return ever. I don't want to see him on the field ever. Like,
yeah,
no.
I think there's way too many wide receivers where if he's keeping this practice squad spot, he's not better than Chris Conley.
No.
He's not. I mean, Malik Turner is a guy that has shown glimpses for the 49ers in off seasons in the past. I would like to see where he is over Trent Taylor, but Willie Snead has to be replaced somehow, but he's not better than Conley. I'd much rather them give Danny Gray a shot over Trent Taylor, even though Danny Gray might be a biscuit. I know Trent Taylor's a biscuit. Danny Gray might be a biscuit. No offense. Sorry.
He even exists. Like, is Danny Gray like exist? I've never seen it. What do you say? Have one career catch on the field? One? Guy's always hurt.
Yeah, but they also manufacture Trent Taylor to make sure he gets his one catch.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah, leaving brings up Tay Martin. He's a guy that people have talked about. Sure, 100%. I mean, Jacob Cowing, we'll find out what's happening with his injury, but Trent Taylor can't take a roster spot over anybody that was drafted.
He absolutely should not. Cynthia, YouTube channel member. Shout out to all our YouTube channel members. I really appreciate your support. Please sign up. It's a great way to support the channel. It's less than $3 a month. You get priority comment response. You get membership badges and custom emojis. I just updated all the emojis, new for 2024, or at least almost all of them, and I added a couple that weren't there before. So you become a YouTube channel member. Check those out. Cynthia says, please talk me off the ledge, Vish. The Aiyuk situation, injuries, Trent canceling joint practice, signs of a disappointing season. How much?
So I think part of the Trent and Aiyuk situation is tying into each other, but I think it's tying into each other in a very different way. So in terms of the money for this year, restructuring Trent, you could actually lower his cap hit and give him the guaranteed money he's asking for this year. So he can actually theoretically, quote unquote, help you save cap by taking more money the way Christian McCaffrey just did 2 months ago. So I don't think needing to pay Trent Williams is why this Brandon Aiyuk situation is held up. I think they're two independent things, but I think the 49ers are waiting for a resolution because if they have to still trade Brandon Aiyuk, and if that happens in the upcoming days, I think they'll immediately go get the Trent Williams deal done, sign the press release, and David Lombardi will say the 49ers are about business. They went and got the Trent Williams deal done. This is a case of prisoner's dilemma, even though this is not prisoner's dilemma because both parties know exactly what the other party is doing in this particular case in Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers. But he will then say essentially that. I think part of it is the PR because I don't think the Trent Williams thing, I feel like that one has a solution that will be found. I don't think they feel like that's something that needs to be started off immediately because I do feel like it's something they can start and get done. And they don't need Trent Williams to be here now. They just need him here before September. I feel like that's how they look at it.
Nick Bosa too, though. Oh, he doesn't need.
You're right. No. You're right. That's a completely fair point, but I think that's how they optically look at it. Now, whether that's ending up being correct in terms of being what's best for the team and Trent Williams, maybe not. But timeline-wise, I think that's how they look at it. And then the canceling of the joint practices, I feel like that's just an unfortunate case of the injuries. I think it's too early to say immediately disappointing season, but I do think we're trending towards a season of the 49ers being unhealthy. And we've seen that in the Shanahan era, the 49ers tend to not be good only when they're not healthy.
Yeah. Every year that Kyle Shanahan has had his quarterback healthy enough to start every game, he's gone to the Super Bowl. The past 3 times, Matt Ryan, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy, he's gone to the Super Bowl. Like, as much as we complain and all that stuff, that's pretty damn amazing. Andy Reid's the only other coach that could say that, which that's incredible. So you would
look who he's saying that with.
Right. You would like to see the health, stay in the 49ers' favor. Now, I will say, if you want a positive update health-wise, Kyle Shanahan said Talanoa Hufanga is going to get checked out by his doctor on Thursday, and assuming everything goes well, he's going to get eased back into practice by the end of the week. So that's a really good sign. Again, eased back into practice doesn't mean he's back, but certainly that would be very good.
Someone coming back, right? That's a good thing. And I want to drive this point home too with Cynthia's thing too, because I feel like a lot of people are looking at extraneous factors, on why the 49ers are going to have a disappointing season, right? Like, oh, the Aiyuk thing, the Trent thing. I think some of that stuff is total bullshit. I'm not telling you that the Aiyuk thing is bullshit or the Trent thing is bullshit, but that affecting the 49ers season to me is bullshit, because this is far less dramatic than the Trey Lance, Brock Purdy saga, the Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo saga, the first time and the second time when they wouldn't trade him and they had a Jimmy Garoppolo, Brandon Aiyuk situation, except nobody wanted Garoppolo. It was a very different kind of thing, right? But they had this situation. So that part doesn't affect them. Where I think they're headed for a disappointing season has nothing to do with the dramaticness or the drama behind those situations. It has everything to do with this team has only not been successful with this coach when they're injured. Even in 2018, they weren't like that great a football team coming into the year on paper, but injuries really hurt that team because they ended up winning a few games that they shouldn't have won at the end of the year with Nick Mullins when they had a few games of people playing together. So I think 100%, Rob, injuries are the only thing standing between this team and success with Kyle Shanahan's the coach. The drama stuff, nah.
I'm seeing a lot of this from Herbie Holland. Oh, the season's gone. I get it. Like, it feels like just a gut punch, right? Like every day it's like, this guy missed practice. This guy's hurt. This guy's got a knee. It's like, oh my God, you get another Aiyuk report about something and you're like, damn it, man. But I feel like this is kind of the flow of the 49ers off seasons in recent years. I feel like, especially for me, I'm bashing Kyle Shanahan in the offseason for how he's handling or not handling certain situations. And then when they get on the field and they start beating the hell out of people, I'm praising Kyle Shanahan because this team is really, really good. And this season feels exactly like other seasons for me from that perspective.
You know what I would like to be more interested in somebody asking Kyle Shanahan? And maybe I'll just tell you, Rob, because, the 49ers media, they only like asking about his mustache. And, hey, Kyle, I know this is a professional presser, but, dude, you grew a mustache this summer, and it was freaking sick, right? That's the 49ers media. But the 49ers have had a historic run in terms of playoff success for a team that hasn't won a Super Bowl, right? When you're talking about 4 NFC championships in 5 years, that's unheard of in NFL history. That's an all-time run. Even if the fact that you didn't win the Super Bowl, go look at the types of teams that have done 4 championship games in 5 years. It's a historic list. It's a historic list of champions for the most part. Those seasons are long and they lead to shorter off seasons, which, lead to shorter time in between each season, right? I would love to see somebody asked Shanahan if he's adjusted their practice for a lot of their veteran players, understanding the fact that they constantly play so late into January and February year after year, which allots less time for their players to get their bodies recovering versus teams whose seasons finish up at, the end of December. And then the other question is, too, has that affected this football team? Has that aged people's bodies maybe faster than they should because they've maybe played in the last 2 years almost double the games that other teams have played?
I think he's sort of talked about how the offseason, like Belichick used to talk about this too, about how like you were sort of behind everybody else in terms of the offseason when you play that late into the year. Kyle talked about it a little, about how the offseason felt short and how important it was for guys to get away and let their body heal. In terms of whether he specifically adjusted their practices because of that, I don't know. The Niners historically practice very hard. One of the hardest practicing teams in the league, particularly under Kyle Shanahan. So that is definitely a question that I think it's worth asking. And I should, maybe I can get Grant to ask it if I put a bug in his ear. But it is worth asking.
I
You
think it's
mentioned
worth asking now that we're here with the injuries, right?
right.
Like, hey, is that just something that you feel? Do you feel like your players feel tired? Do you feel like your players have as much energy as years in the past? I don't think that's necessary. I guess there might be a better way to word that question because it almost sounds like it's someone's fault. I don't know
Mhm.
that it's someone's fault. It's just circumstance. And how are you going to, I guess, combat that going into this year?
By the way, you mentioned the historic streak that the 49ers are on. Levin brought this to my attention. I did not realize this. Do you know the Rams back in the 70s made the conference title game 5 times in 6 years?
Oh, what?
They made it in 74, they lost. 75, they lost. 76, they lost.
Is this like Deacon Jones?
No, this is after Deacon Jones.
Okay.
Then in 77, they lost in the divisional round. 78, they lost in the conference title game again. 79, they went back to the conference title game and won it and lost in the Super Bowl. Guess what? Nobody even knows that about the Rams. Why? Because they didn't win a championship. That is exactly what will happen to this 49ers team if they don't win a Super Bowl. It'll go into the dustbin of history and we won't
Do
remember
you
it at
feel
all.
like that? Do you feel like that? Because I've been thinking about something I've noticed, I guess, from Kyle Shanahan this offseason. And to me, he feels a lot more liberated this offseason than I feel like I've seen in years past when they lost the Super Bowl. And this is, I guess, from a person that from, my bedroom in this, beautifully non-decorated place where I've been observing this guy from whatever proximity I can, something I've noticed. But I feel like in years past, Rob, the way it's come across when they've lost the Super Bowl is it's almost like in Kyle's head, he feels like to be a great coach and to be recognized as a great coach and to be recognized amongst the great coaches, that was the achievement he needed. That was what was standing in between him and that. And I feel like the last couple years, the change in him has been that he's almost like, wait, I don't even have to go win that game. People already think that I'm the freaking man. People already think that I'm amongst the best in the NFL. And I feel like I've seen a little bit of that attitude in him. I think there was and this is me, biggest Kyle Shanahan fan. Really weird thing for me to say. I think there was the moment, before the Super Bowl that, made me feel a little bit upset with him. The weirdness of the Monday before the Super Bowl in terms of how he seemed to be during the interviews that they had during the public media day on the Monday before the Super Bowl. And I feel like how loose he's been generally after the Super Bowl. Like, I feel like we've seen almost a broken man in Kyle Shanahan the other times. I feel like we've seen him almost loose guy this offseason. We've seen him out and about, partying at weddings, enjoying himself. I find this to be a read in his personality. Am I insane? Am I just seeing things from my bedroom? Talk me down, Rob. What's going on?
Yeah, I think you are a little insane. Although you talk about Kyle feeling free, he's got a mullet right now. If you're watching the stream, I put a picture of it.
I didn't want to comment on that.
I mean, you got to feel pretty relaxed if you're willing to rock the mullet. I will say that. Well, regardless of whatever you think of it, there's a confidence that, like, if you want to rock the mullet, you got to have confidence that not everybody has. I'm not confident enough to rock a
And
mullet.
if you want to rock the mullet at 44 too.
Well, yeah, that's true.
While being the lead, like quote unquote leader of an organization, right? This is the face of a multi-million-dollar franchise, and he's rocking a mullet.
Yeah,
He's got swag. He's got swag.
I think, honestly, I think he's driven. I don't think he thinks the way you described it. I think he thinks he has to win a Super Bowl to be great, especially because I think he wants to win at least 2 because his dad has 2. I think he is driven by that. I really, really do. I think that is a prime motivating factor, is living up to his dad's legacy.
See, and I still need to go listen to the TK show interview, but there was that one comment about him saying that they should have won 3 out of 4 that to me was a little bit of a cause for pause, because I feel like at the end of the day, cause for pause, we pause, I'm not like you, Rob. I don't have a dirty mind. I don't tend to say pause for the things you say pause for. I cause for pauses.
All right. Way to just fire a shot at me. Continue.
Sorry, Rob. Sorry. I felt a little bit under a siege there. I had to defend myself.
No, I liked it. Pause for cause. It's good.
No, I'm kidding. But I did the comment that kind of, I guess, irked me was him saying that they should have won 3 out of 4. It's not that I don't think that, right? As a fan, I live in that alternate reality where they had the best team. I feel like they should have won. But I also feel like you're not internalizing the reality if you're still thinking, yeah, we should have won, because that's not what happened. Like, you can't live in the fact that, oh, we should have won, we had the best team, that should have happened, because it just continuously doesn't happen. I feel like there's a freeness and looseness in his personality that I did not see in 2020. And maybe part of it was just COVID caused, COVID took a lot out of a lot of different people. And maybe that took a toll on him as well. But immediately after the Super Bowl, when they lost in 2016, when he came, I felt like how he internalized that. I felt like he was shaken by that. I felt like he was shaken by 2019. I felt like he was pissed off about 2023 because he thought he was going to finally get freaking crowned, and he got ruined because his quarterback got hurt, and that was his third string quarterback. This year, I feel like he's like, whatever. Everybody thinks I'm that guy. Maybe I don't need to win a Super Bowl. I am that guy without that.
No, I think that he certainly has gotten that level of praise. And I know what you mean. Like he said, we should have 3. Like that annoys the hell out of me because it's like, that doesn't matter. Who cares? And they have lived in that reality. Like, well, we should be champions, even though they're not. But that part of that answer was literally within a bigger answer where he was talking about how driven he is to win a Super Bowl and how much it does mean to him and how much he does want it. I really do think, because I think he thinks he's a great coach, but he knows he can never make that claim unless he has one. And I really do think he is driven to have one. Now, whether or not he has internalized the mistakes that he did make, he certainly doesn't seem like it. He's almost never willing to admit he made a mistake. He actually got a penalty in this game, Vish, on that long kickoff return.
Yeah, I saw that. That was
he got
a little ridiculous.
For the second year in a row. He got in the ref's way on a kickoff return because he wasn't paying attention to what was happening on the field. Oh, let me ask you this. You're a good person to talk to about this. I know we're getting a little long here. So he was asked about not calling plays after the game. And he was like, no, we wanted to let Kubiak call plays. He's earned it, blah, blah, blah. Mayoko asked the exact question that I wanted asked, which never happens. So I was like leaning on the edge of my seat. Mayoko asked, did you do this so that if there's ever a situation where you're on the sideline and you need to do something else that a head coach needs to do, you can say to Kubiak, hey, take over for me. I got to go deal with this. And Kyle was like, well, what kinds of things would those be on the sideline? Like kind of like making a joke about it and challenging him about it. And then he said, oh, it was one of the most boring things I've ever done. I brought it up on the post-game show. That's exactly why Kyle should do it, because there are other things that a head coach should do on the sideline during games beside call plays that might take his attention off of what is happening on the field. And that concept seemed totally foreign to Kyle.
Yeah, so I found it interesting for 2 different reasons, and I did see that Q&A, but I found it for 2 different reasons, I guess. For me, it's hard to tell exactly, Rob, like what way works as a head coach, if that makes sense. Because I noticed 2 things from Shanahan's answer, and I guess those are 2 things that aren't necessarily advocated to us as fans as normal things with head coaches, right? The first thing is, one, he seems to trust certain things with his assistant coaches when he gives an answer right like that, right? He seems to trust his assistant coaches when it comes to the rotation of the players in their position, right? Because you would think something Kyle Shanahan would need to monitor is, are his guys getting the right amount of snaps? No, he feels like that's a job I've delegated. That's a job they know. I trust them. They're going to be able to take care of it, right? 2, he seems to be able to trust his assistant coaches in terms of, and this is a preseason game, but I guess his answer was asked for any game in general. He seems to trust his assistant coaches to know the pulse of their players, know when players are confident, know when players aren't confident, right? And be able to build them up through the course of a game. He feels like that's not his job. And so those are 2 things that I definitely noticed right away that I guess we would feel like are different from what we would expect a head coach to do, that he seems to trust them. The third thing I noticed, Rob, and this is something I've noticed with him all the time, is he doesn't put any stock really into what he sees visually at the game. Like, he does not seem to give a crap. Like, that doesn't seem to form his opinions. He doesn't seem to form his opinions based on what he sees at practice. Like, he talks about those things, and I feel like we put equity into it because that's our opportunity to hear him speak. But it's almost like throwaway lines. Like, Kyle, what are you doing at the game? Well, I was bored. Like, dude, aren't you watching the game, trying to evaluate your team in that moment? No, he's watching and evaluating his team on film. He's watching and evaluating his coaches on film. And he puts 100% of his stock into that. And so I again, they've been so successful, and Kyle himself has been so successful as a head coach that just because we are told that one head coach did it a certain way it's like the mechanics thing, doesn't necessarily mean Kyle's way is wrong. I just find it interesting because I would say that these are three things that maybe aren't marketed to us as normal things for a head coach. And this guy has been wildly successful, putting faith into his assistant coaches to handle those sorts of duties. And he seems to not care about what he sees or feels on the field. It seems to be all about what he sees on tape to him.
Which it's an interesting point to bring up, but also like to only evaluate based on tape, I feel like puts it in a vacuum. You have to evaluate, like you have to remember that these calls were made in the heat of the moment during a game when stuff is going on, when there's emotion involved, all of that stuff, right? Like sometimes circumstances dictate what happens. Somebody's friggin' shoe comes off and they have to come off the field and then you got to put a sub in. And like, you know, there are circumstances that affect what is on the film that need to be taken into account. There is a context there that needs to be taken into account. Kyle said, oh, go ahead.
That's awesome you bring that up, though, because I think it brings up, as you say, a direct weakness that you brought up with him, that sometimes he's too caught up in what they've planned and what his thought process was, and he's sticking with it rather than feeling in the moment what his team needs. And that's something he's even talked about and he's improved at. I don't know that he's improved at a drastic enough rate yet for that to be something he can trust. And continue, please, because that is your point, not mine.
Well, no, yeah, I do think that he tries to not let emotion into it. Like he's talked about this multiple times. And so he tries to think about everything that could possibly come up before the game and come up with a plan for it so that when it comes up in the game, he doesn't let emotion influence the logic of the decision, which sounds great in principle, but in practice, it's not always the best way to go. And the ultimate example of this that I will forever give him credit for is Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl against the Seahawks when the clock is ticking away and his coaches are screaming in his ear to call timeout. And he just looks over at Pete Carroll and that sideline and he can tell they don't have their shit together. And he doesn't call timeout because it was a feel thing. It was something that you only get the feel for through decades of coaching. And by the way, Kyle has those, even though he's still young, but it was a total feel thing, right? The textbook, the plan would be to call timeout in that situation so you have more time, but he didn't do that. And I feel like most of the time, Kyle's way is the right way, but not all the time. And part of what makes a good head coach is knowing when to deviate from that.
Yeah, and I think that that's really the missing ingredient in Kyle Shanahan, and that's what's been missing to get him over the hump. And part of it is also, yeah, like it's hard to win Super Bowls with Jimmy Garoppolo. And look, Brock Purdy is a good player. He's not one of those all-time great quarterbacks that you typically win multiple Super Bowls with yet. We'll see how his career turns out. I wouldn't say he's one of those guys at this point. And so it's hard to win a Super Bowl, but at the same time, I feel like the reason the 49ers have come close and fallen short is exactly because of what you described, right? Like 2019, that game, you could feel Deebo Samuel in that game. You could feel his energy. You could feel how scared the Chiefs were every time he got the ball. Why was he out of the game? But then in 2024, you're adamant you want to make sure you keep Deebo in the game, even though the game's not calling for Deebo, because you're like, damn, Deebo's gotten me over the hump in other moments, so I got to go to him now. It's stuff like that. It's, hey, in the moment, take a deep breath and go with who got you there. And now I feel like in some ways with the Super Bowl, the 49ers stars have escaped criticism, right? Christian McCaffrey did fumble. We just choose to ignore that. Trent Williams had a massive couple of penalties. We just choose to ignore that. But
can I say something about the Christian McCaffrey thing? Because I've gotten into an argument with Rich Madrid about this as well, with the Christian McCaffrey thing. He thinks it's like the biggest reason the 49ers didn't win a Super Bowl. Like
I wouldn't say that, but EPA per play, I think, has it as the biggest turn of event in terms of that game.
I mean, it was the first drive of the game. I watched the game where Christian McCaffrey fumbled on the first play of the second quarter against the Cowboys, and the Niners blew him out 42-10. So this fumble was even earlier than that fumble, and yet
he fumbled versus Minnesota too.
Right. Like, but my point is like, the one fumble that early in the game, it hurts. Of course, it hurts for sure. But acting like that was one of the pivotal plays that the Super Bowl hinged on, to me, I think is crazy.
Oh, I'm sorry if it came across that way. I think statistically it's a play that the Super Bowl hinged on. I agree. Circumstance, there was so much game played after that. But looking back, it was a mistake made in the game. He fumbled in scoring
Oh yeah,
territory. And I do feel like he's escaped criticism, for example, for making a big mistake in the game. It wasn't the biggest, but there
because
were a lot of other big mistakes that have been criticized.
but he was the offensive player of the year. And like, yeah, and it was only his third fumble all season long. Like,
But that's all the more reason why you don't want him fumbling. Trent Williams, best left tackle in the NFL. That's all the more reason why you don't want him committing penalties in the Super Bowl.
no, well, yeah, but I mean, first of all, Trent Williams wasn't the only guy that held in that Super Bowl. He's just the
Oh
only guy.
no, but you can't be the one guy they call it on, and his was pretty bad, Rob.
Herbie Holland says, wait, 49ers 4 NFC championships in 5 years is not historic. It's fine without winning, but I see the 70 Raiders 68, 69, 70, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, and they won the Super Bowl. This 49ers run, not so much. Yeah, that is insane about the Raiders. Well, it can be historic without being number one, right?
Yeah, I also think it's historic in the modern era, especially to do it with two different quarterbacks.
Right.
Two
And
NFC championship games with each quarterback. Come on now.
It's a little different when you're doing it in the 70s where there's no free agency and people, if you have a good team, like they can't go anywhere, you know?
Right.
But
I'm not saying what the Raiders did isn't historic, but I think, like you said, the 49ers can lie on a historic plane slightly below that, sure, but it's still historic.
I could argue it's, in terms of NFC. I mean, I know that Andy Reid made 4 in 5 years, I believe. I think Andy Reid made 4 in a row, if I'm not mistaken.
He made 4 in a row, yeah.
Yeah.
And funny thing is, they will forget how they made 4 in a row because of how successful Andy Reid's offense has been and all of that, but that was a defense team with Jim Johnson.
Oh, yeah, their defenses were always good with those.
And then he went right back to that formula. Remember, he had McDermott, and then they fired him, and then they had to mess with Juan Castillo. But after Bob Sutton, he came right back to that formula with Steve Spagnuolo, and lo and behold, Andy Reid is flying again.
This just in, Spagnuolo's good. Herbie's back. He says, never been a Shanahan fan. Offensive coordinator, lose Super Bowl. Offensive genius, okay. 2 Super Bowls for 49ers, 20 points and 19 points, but offensive genius, no. Shanahan, no humility. You can... I get so frustrated by this.
The offensive coordinator lose the Super Bowl is almost like, dude, who else do we track that attribute or statistic for? Hey, you lost this game as a coordinator. Like, never in the history of football.
Especially when the game was lost because the defense couldn't hold the lead that his offense provided them. But beyond that.
Right, but we never do offensive coordinator before quarterback or head coach ever. Like, when have we ever talked about Josh McDaniels in a Patriots Super Bowl loss? Right?
Yeah, no, I trust me. The blame that gets placed on Shanahan, and now people just do it because it makes the narrative better, right? Oh, you lost 3
it just
Super
flows
Bowls.
Sequentially a lot better, right? 2016 lost, 2019 lost, but it's really 19 and 23 that we're looking at.
And look, their offense has not been as good in those Super Bowls as it was in the regular season. But that doesn't mean he's not a genius. Like, again, look at the league. Look at how everybody is essentially copying his system. All his coaches are getting hired. It is the offense in the league, just like the West Coast offense became like the prominent offense in the NFL. 2 things can be true. Kyle Shanahan could be an offensive genius, and the 49ers haven't won a Super Bowl. Those 2 things are true. Like, here's the thing. Let's say Nick Bosa tackles Patrick Mahomes on 4th down in the Super Bowl, right? And the Niners win. Then all of a sudden, is Kyle Shanahan a genius? If you're going to say yes, that's illogical because Shanahan wouldn't have changed anything. So that's why I get frustrated by this. I appreciate the donation, Herbie. Thank you so much. But I do get frustrated when I say that. How could he not be a genius if the whole NFL is copying his system? Oh, that's the smartest guys in football in the world have looked at what he's doing and say, holy crap, we should do that.
By the way, offensive genius doesn't exactly mean best winning football coach. Like, those are 2 different titles also. And the thing is, the reason those 2 things get conflated with this guy is because he's offensive genius and he wins a lot. as the head coach, right? Both of those things tie together. That's why we point to, well, you can't give him that label because he hasn't won a Super Bowl, but that's not the case. He is very good at coaching offensive football. He's a genius when it comes to scheming the marrying of the run game and the pass game and the play action off of the run. It's genius. He's also not been the most successful head coach when it comes to winning the big games. Both of those titles, like you said, you landed that plane beautifully, Rob. They can exist with him.
I've taken that flight a lot of times, Fish. That's how I can land the plane so beautifully. Because
you do it every Wednesday with Grant?
Yeah, pretty much. It freaking drives me nuts, man. It really does. Herbie, continuing.
And Grant's amazing at the way he like says the lore now too. Like he almost like drums it up as like just like a story that's like got this twist and turn. The way he describes it too is he's good at telling that story.
I never saw a guy take more, like, he gets like nailed because they lost one Super Bowl in overtime. Like the Super Bowl went to overtime and almost double overtime, by the way. Like it was a really freaking close game.
I do feel like, to be fair, he didn't help himself with
No,
how he handled the post-game aspect of it. And I think that's what's getting hammered. I think people are afraid to be like, well, what we're really hammering is the guy didn't do a good job answering questions after about it. And people aren't saying that, right? They had no issues with Cam Newton saying it, but they won't do it to the head coach, CEO of the organization. That's like, yeah, he did a bad job that day answering questions. He was emotional, but he did a bad job answering those questions.
Herbie says, so tell me why in the midst of a Super Bowl, this genius can't dial up a simple blocking scheme to combat a blitz that's killing your offense and keeping you from scoring touchdowns. Please tell me. Well, first of all, it doesn't help when your right guard publicly admits he went rogue and didn't follow the blocking scheme on the critical third down in the Super Bowl. Like Spencer Burford literally said, I didn't do what the system said. John Feliciano called Spencer Burford out for not doing that. Also, if we really want to dive deep into this thing, as I brought up on the show a little while ago, right after the 2-minute warning on 3rd and 5, Kyle Shanahan draws up the perfect play. He puts Aiyuk in the slot. It's double slants to one side. Jennings is on the outside. The play is designed to go to Aiyuk. How do we know? Brock Purdy said it's the one play he regrets in the Super Bowl because it's designed to be read inside out. Aiyuk is on the inside. He's wide ass open. Brock is supposed to throw the ball to Aiyuk, but he didn't because he wanted to force it to Jennings because Jennings was having such a good game. Brock has admitted all of this publicly. So Kyle dialed up a play in the perfect spot that's going to let the Niners run out the clock at the end of regulation in the Super Bowl. Brock didn't do what he was supposed to do. Brock has admitted this. So, we're going to sit there and say,
I would argue with that slightly differently. I don't know that necessarily kills his point, but here's what I'll say about it, okay? I think this one is pretty simple, Rob. They call the play at the end of the game, right? He says he's not an offensive genius, but that play worked schematically. What didn't work was the execution of the play, but that doesn't make him a non-offensive genius. The offensive genius's job is to draw up a play that works, right? He did exactly that, so he is an offensive genius. The execution aspect of it is, hey, as a head coach, he's got to make sure that his players are capable of executing that when it counts. And when they don't do that, it's his fault. Obviously, as the leader of the team, that's what happens when you're the leader. But it's also, like you said, Spencer Burford's fault for going the wrong way. He's also a human being with the job. Yes, the leader will take some of the brunt of it because he's the leader, but Spencer Burford also takes it for that. But neither of those things prove that he isn't an offensive genius because the play worked.
It's frustrating for me. Like, and I get it, man. We're all frustrated by it, but I feel like we need to evaluate this stuff objectively. Bazzyman says the Chiefs had 6 fumbles in the Super Bowl and recovered them due to sheer luck. I think they recovered 5 of them because there was one in the red zone that the Niners got back. Must be Andy Reid's masterful coaching. I mean, look, Shanahan definitely made mistakes in the Super Bowls, both Super Bowls, and I have criticized him for them forever and immediately. I did it immediately after both, and the evidence is there. You can go on YouTube and watch them. So, you can call me an apologist, but I have criticized Kyle plenty. But also, you can't sit there and say he's not a genius. Like, every player that comes to the 49ers, what do they talk about? Holy crap, I've learned more about football from Kyle Shanahan than I did anywhere else in my career, even when they're here for like days. Like, They're not making it up. I mean, geez, the evidence is overwhelming. Herbie says Bill Walsh, offensive genius, not on that level. Come on.
Yeah, he's not on that level.
No, also
that does not everybody's on the level of, the greatest at everything. Like that doesn't like is there only one all-time great basketball player
right.
because nobody's on that level? Is there only one all-time great wide receiver because nobody's on Jerry Rice's level?
I think Andy Reid is an offensive genius. Also, I've called Andy Reid the greatest offensive mind of his generation. Like there can be
not even close to Bill Walsh's level.
Right. Like there can be more than one. Geez. It's not
Bill Walsh is the greatest visionary in the history of the sport. I read a couple books of his. Like you talk about, or not you as in you or me, but you see how Bill Walsh describes the NFL and how like players should be evaluated, what players you should look for at each position, stuff like that. He's writing and describing these things in the 90s and the 80s, and they're more than applicable today. It's amazing. The guy is maybe the single greatest human in football in terms of how he's affected the game as a visionary. Like, yeah, nobody's on that level probably. Nobody's that level of genius. Rob nod. Otherwise, he's a little out of my age range. Okay, I don't want to be.
Harris says y'all treat him like Walsh. No, we don't. No, we don't. Nobody has said Kyle Shanahan is the best head coach the 49ers have ever had. Nobody said Kyle Shanahan is better than Bill Walsh. Nobody has said that. Like, who are you arguing against, Harris? That's what I want to know.
It's a straw man. It's a straw man. He's not an offensive genius because he's not Bill Walsh. But nobody is saying he's an offensive genius or because he's Bill Walsh. They're just saying individually he's an offensive genius.
It's like Steve Young and Joe Montana, right? People were like, oh, Young's not as good as Montana. Well, yeah, no crap. But Steve Young is a Hall of Fame quarterback.
He won 2 MVPs.
He was awesome. Anyway, I didn't mean to
put Steve Young on the teams in the 80s. Did they lose?
Well, he did lose some of those.
Against who in the 80s was as good as Dallas was in 91, 92, or 93?
Oh, no, those Cowboy teams were.
Or 92 and 93.
Those Cowboy teams.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, I know that people will say, oh, if Joe was on the 92 or 93 team, the 49ers would win. I don't know. I wasn't alive then. But I have seen Joe and Steve, and I feel like sometimes Steve gets the short end of the straw in that conversation just because of how it was covered back then and how all-time great Joe was in terms of his perception. Not that Joe wasn't great, but I feel like Steve gets the short end of the straw for it.
Steve Young just played football at the wrong time. If Steve Young was playing today, he'd be the best quarterback in the league. He would be kicking the hell out of everybody.
He was the best quarterback in the league at the time he played too.
But he'd be even better because they would let him run. They would draw plays for him to run. And Steve Young is
Dude, it's hard to have a better career than Steve Young. What, 10 years starting, 8 Pro Bowls, 2 MVPs. He was the highest rated passer in NFL history. He had the highest completion percentage, most efficient passing seasons. Like, I know what you mean, but like, I feel like his career doesn't get enough credit for what it was then, if that makes sense. Agreed. And so when you say it like that now, to me, it sounds like, oh, he didn't achieve all he could then, when what he achieved in the time he played then is like unreal when it comes to quarterback. In fact, I think he gets screwed every time we talk about these top 10 quarterback lists. And I know we've talked about a bunch of miscellaneous things thanks to me not watching this game on Saturday in this show. But you know what? We'll continue on it. Anytime we talk top 10 quarterbacks, you get guys that get inflated into that conversation because they accumulated longevity that Young didn't get to because he didn't get to start, seriously until he was almost 30. And then you get guys into the conversation like, Lamar's already getting up there in some of these conversations because of 2 MVPs. Nobody mentions that Steve Young won 2 MVPs too. Like Brett Favre's 3 MVPs hold him strong in that conversation, along with the longevity, obviously. But Young, to me, there's no way Young cannot be included 5 through 10 when we're talking about the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And I feel like he's often left out. I don't know if you see it more than me, Rob. Am I creating a straw man after we just told Harris not to create one? But yeah,
he's left out because he has 2, and you can't be in that conversation unless you have at least 3. That's just the reality of it.
Who's got 3 besides Manning and Rodgers?
No, I was talking rings, not MVP.
Oh, rings.
Yeah, I was talking.
But dude, isn't that conversation kind of bullshit when it comes to Peyton Manning? Right, like that second ring.
See, I never looked at it that way because there were years where Peyton Manning was incredible and didn't win a ring. So if you're going to like try and ding him because he was not good this last year and got a ring, well, that evens out to me. So
I agree with you. Maybe I should rephrase that as in I feel like Young should be similarly credited for those other years that he was excellent and they didn't win a ring because they lost to Green Bay, who was very good, or they lost to Dallas, who was very, very good. Just
Herbie,
as Manning does for losing to Brady and Belichick.
Right. Well, see, there's a common thread in all of this. And Herbie, let me just read his comment. Andy Reid comes from Mike Holmgren, comes from Bill Walsh. Stop it. Again, I don't know what your point is, Herbie. No one says Bill Walsh is bad. And no one says Kyle is Bill Walsh. Like, no one is disputing the greatness of Bill Walsh. I feel like, I don't know, we have a disconnect there. We're not understanding what each other means.
Isn't that crazy, though, what we just did? Forget Hugh Herbie for a second. I don't want to continue this. I know what he's doing here. Herbie, you're having a good time, pal. But isn't it crazy how we just took a guy who won 5 MVPs and is arguably the greatest player that we've ever seen for a course of so many games and diminished his career based on a few losses at the end of seasons?
Peyton Manning?
Like, if we're going like game to game in their career, is there a greater player game to game than Peyton Manning?
I don't think so. I love Peyton.
We weight every single game in their career the same. I feel like he's the greatest player in NFL history.
I don't know about that, but I mean, he was incredible for
with
sure.
Longevity combined. Yeah.
But look, with Peyton, with Steve Young, and with these current 49ers, why are they not regarded higher? Now, Peyton maybe avoids some of this, but it's because they ran up against arguably the greatest of all time. Tom Brady with Peyton Manning, the Cowboys, those Jimmy Johnson Cowboys teams with Steve Young, and these 49ers teams with Patrick Mahomes. It's like the Phil
100%.
Mickelson effect with Tiger Woods. We would think Phil Mickelson is such a better golfer if Tiger Woods never existed and you never changed anything about any shot Phil Mickelson has ever had. But because he kept losing to Tiger, that gets obscured. That greatness gets obscured. It's kind of like Josh Allen losing to Mahomes also, by the way. That's where we are now.
I actually disagree with you a little bit when it comes to the 49ers. Because yes, their greatness gets diminished in the sense that they don't get to be champions. But I feel like by losing to Mahomes, Rob, they're going to be remembered in this list of great losers that, for example, we got examples of the Raiders and the Rams on this show that was news to us about them making NFC championship games. If that team had gone and lost to, a team in the 80s, like the 80s 49ers, stuff like that, I feel like people would all of a sudden look at, oh man, those Rams teams were crazy, but they just ran into the 49ers in the 80s. The way people talk about the Boomer Esiason Bengals or, the first Bengals team in 81.
About the Boomer Esiason Bengals?
Me. I talk about Sam Weish. I love Sam Weish.
That's the Sam Weish.
Well, let me make a better point for you then. It's the way people talk about John Starks and Patrick Ewing and Charles Oakley, all of them bad boy Knicks, Rob. The bad boy Knicks. Oh, how many championships they could have won if they didn't run into Jordan, or, the Pacers teams with Reggie Miller, the most overrated player in the history of the NBA. Or the Utah teams, right, with Stockton and Malone. So I feel like the 49ers in that particular way, for example, will be remembered differently because they are a team that lost twice to a guy that probably will, when it's all said and done, be looked at as maybe 1 or 2 when it comes to the most iconic players in the history of the sport.
I don't think they'll be remembered at all.
You don't think they'll be remembered at all?
Who remembers those Rams teams that I brought up earlier? Nobody.
Yeah, but my point is did they lose to Pittsburgh in the 70s?
I don't remember who they lost to in the one Super Bowl they got to. It might have been Pittsburgh. I can't remember.
I feel like the 2 losses to Mahomes, if they lost to different teams, I think there's no shot, Rob. I think both being to Mahomes, it's like, oh, Mahomes went and got that team. Like the way they'll write it will elevate the 49ers to elevate Mahomes. That's really what I'm trying to say. But I think you might be right. I might be pushing it a little bit when it comes to.
Herbie is back. He says, no, seriously, I'm just an old 49ers fan watching these current 49ers struggle to get over that Super Bowl line. And I really feel bad for the fans who have not experienced the feeling of Super Bowl wins. Yes, so do I.
I got you, Herbie. But, the salary cap, it's a thing.
Look, I was old enough to remember the 49ers last Super Bowl. I was 9 when they won in 1994. I remember.
I wasn't.
I know what it's like. And of course I want 49er fans of today. Poor Vish has never experienced.
I don't. This is horrible, Herbie. Like, thank you for feeling bad for me. This sucks. Every year I lose, a part of myself when this football team loses.
I had a really hard time when they lost to the Ravens in 2012 because for me, it was like, 49ers don't lose Super Bowls. What do you mean we lost? We lost? Like when they were coming back in that game, I was like, of course they're coming back. The 49ers don't lose Super Bowls. They're the only undefeated Super Bowl team in NFL history. I really didn't think that they could lose a Super Bowl. And then they did. And then they did again. And then they did again. And I have been disabused
the
of that.
Ravens. The Ravens game is so weird that you talk about the emotions like that because I was just pissed off. When they went down that much, I don't care what anyone says. That was the most lopsided Super Bowl opportunity of the three in my lifetime. The 49ers were much better than that Ravens team, top to bottom. Like that Ravens team was old. They were a bunch of older names. They beat a bad New England team to make the Super Bowl that they should have beaten a year ago, who wasn't that good. But Billy Cundiff and Lee Evans ruined that for them. Lee Evans dropping the game-winning touchdown, and then Billy Cundiff kicking the game-tying field goal 90 million miles wide right in Foxborough. So like that team was, and the 49ers were way better. They were totally unprepared to play that game, starting with the pre-snap penalty on the first play of the game. It was a total mess. I was really pissed off about that one, but the one that hurt me the most was 2019, man. That team was my favorite 49ers team I've ever seen. I loved watching all the NRGs. I loved watching all of the mic'd ups. Like I never connected more with the football team than the 2019 team because of how much I was invested in 15 and 16 when this team sucked, how much I wanted them to get in Kyle Shanahan, how much I believed in Kyle Shanahan, and then just like the makeup of the team, how young they were, like how likable Kittle and Debo were so early in their career. I've never loved a team more than the 2019 49ers, and I'll never get over that one. I think 23 hurts the most because I think logically in my head, that was the team that was the best. I think 12 had the best chance because I think they had the most lopsided Super Bowl matchup, but 19 was my favorite team.
12, they ran up against Joe Flacco just on a heater. 11 touchdowns.
They let him be on that heater.
He had 11 touchdowns and no picks in that Super Bowl run. It wasn't just that game, man.
That Denver team was not a good defense, and that New England team was not that good of a defense.
Well, first of all, they shouldn't even have beaten Denver. Remember? Joe Flacco.
Jacoby Jones miracle. Yeah. Raheem Moore from UCLA.
Raheem Moore, I'll never forgive you. Herbie says, gosh, that's 9 years old. Now you're making me feel really old. Well, I feel really old by saying I was old enough to remember the Niners' last Super Bowl. Yeah, 30 years ago.
You are old, though, Rob. That's the thing.
I know. I'm aware of it every single day. Damn it. Anyway, let's not rehash old Super Bowl losses. I actually said this, Vish, and we can end here for the post-game reaction show. I said, now that like we started a preseason game, I really do feel like we can bury 2023. Like I moved beyond it now. I'm 2024. Like it's a new year. We actually have new football to talk about. It was like a cathartic moment for me when I saw that ball get kicked off.
I haven't seen that ball get kicked off. I wanted to do it this morning, but I will say, Rob, like I told our viewers in our previous show, I'm training for a marathon. If you have any advice for Vish while training for a marathon, please let me know. The body has been aching. I was supposed to get up at 5:30 a.m. this morning and watch the game and be ready for this show. And I woke up at 7 a.m. and ran to work at 7:35. So not my best.
Well, that's your bad for training for a marathon. You do know what happened to the guy that ran the first ever marathon, right?
What happened?
He dropped dead. The guy that they named it after was running to a town called Marathon. And when he got there, he died.
Rob, you've probably been waiting to say this. I'll let you know the week I'm running my marathon. It's the first week of October. And on the Monday show, you could be like, well, see you guys next week. But I can't guarantee if Vish will be alive on Monday.
I'm just saying, like, the facts are the facts, okay? He ran that distance. He told the message he had to tell, and then he dropped dead. That's all the signal I need to never run for any reason. By the way, thank you, Herbie, who once again says,
really, you, Herbie.
Together. You guys keep this up all season. I really hope. Good luck, guys. Thank you, Herbie.
Hope you keep up the passion up all season, Herbie.
Yes.
You made this show today.
Your super chats help us keep the passion up, Herbie. So thank you very much. We always appreciate those. Again, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, rate, review, follow the Gold Standard Podcast Network wherever you get your podcast. You should like and subscribe to Vish Kumaran's YouTube channel as well. Just search Vish Kumaran. It pops right up. We didn't dual stream this one today, but we do dual stream a lot. And Vish has a ton of original content that you can only get on his channel. So you should go and sign up for that as well. All right, Vish, Go watch the game because I want your thoughts on it, and then we can do another show and talk about
For
that.
sure, Rob, please go take your shoes off as well. Sean Taylor did just remind me of that nasty habit that you seem to have. Dude, those are disgusting. I can see the brown on your shoes from here.
That's just they don't look the same on camera. They're red. They're 49ers red.
No. I see it on the bottom of the shoes. Come on.
Oh, well, yeah, there's dirt on the bottom of my shoes. Yes.
In your house, too.
Oh, my God, the horror.
Dude, get Ponsel immediately, man. I'll come to your house for free and wipe down your floors if you want. That's gross.
I'll never turn down. I clean my floors frequently. We don't need to get into
it. Better be every day when I saw those shoes.
Why? Are you going to roll around and start licking my floor? What are you worried about?
I'm worried about everything, Rob. What happens if you accidentally drop a goldfish? There's no such thing as the 5-second rule in your house.
Yeah, you throw it in the garbage because I don't eat food that falls on the floor. What do we?
Yeah, Rob, imagine living life without the 5-second rule.
I've survived for 39 years. I'm doing okay.
That's so sad. That's so sad. What happens, Rob? You've never reached a situation where you reach the end of the bag and accidentally you fumble, you pull a Christian McCaffrey in the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden the last item in the bag falls out and hits your floor. In the case of your floor, I'd be scared of all kinds of diseases I'm going to get by eating that. Everybody else gets the 5-second rule in that situation.
You know what? Sometimes I eat it off the floor and I survive. I don't know how. Somehow I've managed to survive.
Go get a tetanus shot, buddy.
I mean, God, you clean your floors. Give me a break. All you pearl clutchers. I guess you're walking through raw sewage when you go outside that you got to take your shoes off when you come in the house. It's ridiculous.
All right, I got your emotions wired at the right point. Now you're ready to talk post-game with the 49ers game. I'll leave you here.
Goodbye.